Guys, yesterday the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of the Interior came together and kind of finalized the 2026-2027 water allocation plans for the entire Colorado River system. Now, it looks like Arizona's going to take the brunt of the cut. They're saying a 30% cut to Arizona's Colorado River means an annual reduction of about 760,000 acre feet. Under a federal plan, again by the Department of the Interior and the Bureau, they're responding to record lows at Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Now, they're saying that Arizona, again, is absorbing the largest regional reduction. And they're saying that the municipal tap water remains protected through stored reserves and alternative supplies. Anytime you're dealing with these underground aquifers of stored water, sometimes you really don't know what all's in it and how much it's going to cost to pump it out and clean it and things like that. Anyway, the 30% is bad enough, but you got CAP, guys. That's the Central Arizona Project, and it is the irrigation canal that gets into Arizona, splits off and goes to California, and then I think it has to be pumped about 3,000 feet up to get to Phoenix. You've seen pictures of this CAP. Again, it's like an aqueduct, but that's going to take a 50% cut. You know, it provides water to Phoenix and Tucson. Again, you're facing a 50% delivery reduction, guys. They're saying the urban tap water, an average residential customer, will keep their water running. Cities have banked emergency water and use local reservoirs like the Salt and Verde rivers. Now, again, there's not been much snow, and the rivers are as tapped as the grids. And all of this is coming out because they've been watching the same numbers we have, even though it's not on mainstream media, and they're not really talking about the details of it. I looked at all three charts coming from Flaming Gorge to Powell to Mead this morning, and the numbers are not looking good at all, guys. Again, the numbers are showing that 9 weeks maximum at Powell. They have opened up the gates at Powell enough to keep Mead propped up. Remember, we were losing 2 feet every 14 days, and they've slowed that down to almost a foot, maybe just under a foot a week now, because of the increased outflow from Powell and the demand from downstream of Lake Mead itself. What is happening, guys, is Powell is not going to be able to hold that up very much longer. The moment that Powell has to shut those gates to protect its infrastructure, Mead will collapse in just a few weeks, maybe a few days, depends on when that happens. Now, notice it's not going to be industry that takes the big brunt. It says Central Arizona farming and rural irrigation districts bear the heaviest initial burden of surface water loss. Consumer water bills may rise slightly as municipalities fund infrastructure or by alternative water transfer. Now, again, a lot of this is going to be controlled by the large industries and the money that goes into the coffers. You understand that how that works. And so they're not going to really tell you a lot about the problems until it's actually too late. But here's what they're saying again. The consumer water bills may rise slightly, and they use that word slightly very loosely, guys. But you know how politicians are. Anyway, they may rise slightly as municipalities fund infrastructure or buy alternative water transfers. Heightened local drought stages and stricter public appeals on surcharges will likely roll out. This is coming out of the cityofphoenix.gov. You know the characters involved in that. Now, in their timeline, they're saying October 1st this year, the new federal decision framework officially takes effect. Now, in 2027-2028, the steep 760 acre-foot annual cuts will apply to these next 2 calendar years. Beyond 2028, they're saying, which is a joke, the federal plan runs through 2036. Now, that's kicking it down the road, isn't it? Future cuts are talking about the federal officials will review reservoir levels every 2 years and may order deeper cuts if Lake Mead keeps dropping. Coming out of who? The Bureau of Reclamation. See that? What can I say? What can you say? Again, the math just doesn't math. But they're saying again, October 1st, 2026, the new rule starts. But the actual reduction in physical water deliveries hit Arizona canals on January the 1st, 2027. By then, guys, do you realize the situation we're going to be in? By October, you're going to see very little water except for what they call run of the river coming from either reservoir, unless they allow Powell to be physically destroyed through cavitation, and then it won't last long at all anyway. But when they're talking about 2027, 2028, what are they thinking? If you look deeper at it, I'd like to see in the comments what you think they're doing. It says the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation uses this October timeline because winter snow starts building up in the mountains right after October, which determines how much water fills the river for the next year. I'm still looking at the precipitable water that's available on the satellites, and it's not showing much of any type of moisture at all. It's still showing the high pressure ridge in the Pacific Ocean blocking moisture from coming into California and over into the Colorado River basin. And here in the south, we're getting most of the moisture on this side of the country. That area is just being blocked out all the way up into the Arctic. Guys, and instead of stepping up to the plate, which needs to happen right now, the government is focused on entirely different things that are important, I guess, but this is pretty critical. One thing is they're trying to avoid a 7-state war. The government is terrified of triggering a massive historic lawsuit. If the Bureau of Reclamation permanently changes the 1922 Colorado River Compact, states like California and Colorado will immediately sue the federal government. A lawsuit of that scale could freeze water management entirely and end up at the Supreme Court for a decade. Now, guys, all of that is paper water, okay? It's not existing water, and so it's just another plan to do nothing. The current plan completely ignores the fact that the upper basin states like Colorado and Utah are taking zero mandatory cuts. Guys, and that's really a false statement, because people like Tony Valdez and those folks up at Flaming Gorge have already taken the cuts. They are down low. They're losing their marinas. They can't hardly take any more cuts. It's not that they're left out and they're protecting it. They've drained the place. You can look at the Flaming Gorge chart and what it's sending out to Mead. You'll see that. But it says the Bureau is relying on the legal technicality that the upper basin doesn't have the physical reservoirs to hold back water the same way Hoover Dam does. No, they're not as deep, not as big. But Arizona's water department has publicly called this reality-dodging decision unacceptable and economically devastating. But guys, that's just greed showing, not by the consumers, but by the people that have allowed Arizona to be expanded exponentially. And the same group of people that have allowed and had their ledgers padded very heavily by some big industries that we keep an eye on. You know who I'm talking about. Now, one of the biggest things that they're hiding is and it's in plain sight because you and I look at it, is how close Lake Mead and Lake Powell are to dead pool status. The point where water drops so low, guys, it can no longer pass through the dams to generate electricity or flow downstream. This year's record low winter snowpack pushed reservoirs to their lowest level since 1963. Now, this line is kind of important, and it's quite telling to me. It says, instead of planning for a permanently smaller river, which is coming, the federal plan relies heavily on voluntary cuts, hoping for better weather that climate data says it is not coming. We'll take a look at that satellite information. But here, and there's talking about voluntary cuts, and if I'm not mistaken, California did volunteer to take a 10% cut, guys. Now, it wasn't mandatory, but they volunteered doing that to try to keep the mandatory regulations off their back. But what are we seeing in that sentence? Instead of planning, the federal plan relies on voluntary cuts. Why? 2 reasons. They don't have to get involved and they can't be sued. They got too much they're dealing with, they think. And they don't want to get involved in this. Why? Elections are not far off. And so if they can stay out of the courtrooms and not take the blame for watching the destruction of the Colorado River hydro system, then I guess it's easier for them. Now, we watched this satellite for years, but especially since this May, as we saw the river start to decline. And what you're looking at in the brown areas and tan areas is where there's very little chance and very little moisture in the atmosphere. And this is looking at the surface, if you notice here. But if we go very high up to 500 HPO, we see the same thing. And again, you can see where the moisture's trapped here in the northern Gulf and the Gulf states along this area, along the northeast. But this system is set up in blocking moisture. Look at this, all the way down the entire western coast. And look how dry it is in the Arctic. Look at that, guys. And so what we're seeing is not much of a chance at all of this changing. It's been like this since May, and it actually started setting up last year, and that's why all the snow melted by March of this year. And we see the situation now. But again, what I'm seeing is the changing of the Earth age. It's not like a sudden day of destruction, but this is a very quick changing. If on the time scale, look at what we're seeing. And I want to show you something else while we're here. These are sea surface temperatures, and they're breaking all records. Guys, look at the size of the El Nino. Look at that. And so what you're seeing is it's expanded so far north that this is blocking all the moisture coming in off the Pacific Ocean. Check that out. And look at the temperature, again, along the edges of Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico itself. And look at how hot this is trapping the heat in the Atlantic Ocean. Look at the ice. There's not much left in the Arctic, guys. All of this is showing you where their ice is. This is not a model. This is actual satellite data that's showing currently where we have ocean, where there's normally ice. I know in the summer it gets weaker, but this started again in 2012, December 21st. And now it's getting out of control. These are open pockets of ocean water and waves plowing into the ice sheets that are left. It's a record loss. And again, summertime, we're supposed to see that. Here's what we're not supposed to see, and this is going to throw the entire balance of the planet off. The South Pole is not supposed to be this warm at all. This is the part of their winter this month where it's supposed to be the coldest, the most solid forming of ice sheets and everything else. Guys, and that is not happening. There's water flowing all the way through the northern peninsula here. And we looked at this area in the video just, yesterday or the day before, of the Drake Passage right through here. All of this is ice-free. And we're in this areas where we're starting to see the big glaciers start to melt down. But let's look at one other thing. Now, this is sea surface temperature still, but this is anomalies above average. Again, this should not be happening in winter at the Arctic. We went through that 13,000 half cycle phase. And that has everything to do with the tilting of the planet, guys, because that's how the seasons and the equinoxes and things like that are determined, is because of those seasonal changes and cycles that, again, half cycle of 26,000 years. But if we look at this, again, the anomalies here, and here's the northern peninsula of the Antarctic, here's the southern tip, and here's where we saw the impact that tore this section apart according to the old maps. But right now we are looking at, if you look at this section right over here, 1.6 degrees centigrade above normal. That's 2.9 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for the winter. This is so the way the Earth has always worked. It swaps. You got one cold section, one hot section, and as the seasons change, they rotate their jobs. But when they both get into a loop of heat, the game is on, and it's very close to getting dangerous. So dangerous that we're seeing, what is it, not just the Colorado River, but in the video the other day, we talked about the Rio Grande. And guys, the rivers of the world are seeing this. And the aquifers of the world are seeing this, and the politicians are playing games. So it's what you got to do. Let me pull this back down. Again, these are anomalies. Look at that. That's the El Nino. And look how far north this is. Kamchatka, Russia is completely abnormal. And all the rivers coming out of northern Russia are pushing into the Arctic ice. And it should be ice here. But they're getting, let's see, 5.3 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. Sea ice melts around 28.8 degrees. If it's fresh water, it's about 32 degrees. So when you're dealing with 5.3 degree Fahrenheit above normal, and what you're seeing is current and waves crashing into the edges of the ice sheet, guys, it is taking out the ice on both poles at one time. In other words, our air conditioning system is shutting down. It's called the cryosphere, which means cold, keeping it cool. That's shutting down. This age will not be defined by a flood, but by fire. And that's what we're looking at, guys. I just want to come in and take a look at it. I look at the charts every day, watching the decline of the river, and it becomes obvious. Let me just show you a couple of those, not to get technical, so don't freak out, but let's check them out. Quick look at Lake Powell, guys. Down 2.18 feet over the last 14 days, 1.6 feet per week. That's what Mead was doing before they opened up the gates and let a little more water out of Powell to keep Mead propped up. But you can see by the inflows, they're putting out twice as much as they're taking in from upstream in Flaming Gorge. And that's not going to last very long because they are in a rush. Look at the elevation. 35,1907 as of yesterday. That means that they're about 9 feet from having to shut down their turbines. And 9 feet at 1 foot a week, if it stays at this input level, is when it shuts down. The moment it shuts down again, Lake Mead is going to be right behind it if it doesn't get there before it. Guys, I know it's a little hard to see, and I'll pull this up, but let me just point this out. This is Flaming Gorge that feeds Powell, okay? Look at the inflow, and it varies from 82 cubic feet per second in a day to 2242. But what has remained constant is this side. It's actually increased just a little bit because Powell's in trouble. The average is 1929 cubic feet per second flowing out of Flaming Gorge downstream. You can see days with 18 and then 19 and now 2074. Why? But they're trying to keep Powell up to keep Mead up. But the inflow is not there. The battery backup for Lake Powell is vanishing very quickly. The data is just not going to lie to us, guys. Your average outflow to Powell is 1929 or 1929 cubic feet per second. The average inflow to Flaming Gorge is 793. So you're about 3 times as far as the output compared to input. You're letting out 3 times more than they're taking in. In other words, there's not much more they can give. Look at some of the days, 82 cubic feet per second. Think about that. So we've got a 3-way system, and it's all in trouble. Now, if they had not increased a little bit of outflow to Powell, and Powell increased its outflow to Mead, Mead would already be shut down, guys. But look at what they've done. Again, this is Lake Mead. Last 14 days, it's losing 0.96 feet over these 2 measurements. And so they've cut it down from about 2 feet over 14 days, or a foot per week, to about a half a foot per week because of what? Because they're draining Powell. Now, they even had a couple of plus days. We haven't seen that since May, but we understand why. Your inflow is steady from Powell. Look at this, 9,000 average. Most of it's 8.7, a couple of 10,000 cubic feet per second days here. Average 9. Your outflow is higher at 10,000 because of the necessary demand from downstream. So Powell is propping up these numbers to Mead, which is propping up everything below it. You understand what we're looking at now? So as soon as Powell has to slow down, whether it's forced because of the drought and the lack of upstream and possibly no rain or whatever it is, or just forced to cut back to save its internal infrastructure, these inflow numbers are going to drop so fast, guys, that you're going to instantly reach the loss of 80% of all hydropower coming out of Hoover Dam and much of the downstream water. And I've talked about the grid, and what they're seeing now in the last few days is north of Lake Powell and of Mead, you have a main junction of what they call, I think it's the Intercontinental Western Grid, something like that. It's the big western grid that ties all of the West together. And north of there, there's one of the kind of crossing points where the grids tie together is under tremendous strain today. And what they're having to do, and they've been having to do it for a few days, because as Mead goes down, it loses hydropower. Even though it's not shut down yet, each foot of water causes lack of hydro push. But what they're seeing now is they've had to reverse the flow. In other words, the dams and everything that we see in the entire system would feed from north to south, down into Arizona, down into California, and those areas. But now that grid has been reversed. It's flowing from the south to the north, and it's creating phase problems and intense grid pressures in the heat as we speak. So as soon as, we don't have till 2028 is my point. We don't have till 2027. If they continue to do nothing, which really, guys, there's nothing they can do. It's just they need to step up to the plate and admit it and let people prepare and help people prepare. Maybe in some of the big expensive things the nation's doing right now, bring that back home and help the people here. I doubt very much that will happen because we are not in the equation. I don't think, not many of us are at all. But we're watching it, guys. You watch it. It's a heads up, and be safe.